Good morning to all participants who are here with us now. And please just wait for us. Let's wait 1-2 minutes, no more, for other persons to arrive. After this minimum delay, we will start. Okay, so a couple of minutes have gone, and I would I think it's time to start with our webinar today. Thanks for everybody who is attending. Let me introduce myself. My name is Luca Orselli, and I represent the Schneider Group in Italy. Today, we will devote together more or less 1 hour to talk about the opportunities for medium small enterprises in these two important countries in the world, China and Russia, but with particular focus on the green technology sector. It's nice to see that there are people coming from many parts of the world listening to us today. It's good. We're very proud. Thank you. So today it will be speaking myself from Schneider Group, plus my colleague, Mr. Christoph Spank, who is our director for market research. So it's our guru for all what's necessary to know about these markets. And Mr. Riccardo.benussi of Dezan Shira, his partner of Dezan Shira, he will focus on China. Just let me introduce a little bit who is the Schneider Group for those who would not be familiar with us. We are a Russian company based in Moscow, more or less 500 people around in the world, in Russia and other former CIS countries. When we provide services, let's say 360 degrees for companies who want to enter and develop in these countries, from the commercial, legal, custom, certification, and so on services. So at least you know who is talking to you. If you don't know it yet. So we can go, and let's say in my point, I would like to touch first of all, what's the market in Russia, because we are talking about the opportunities. The opportunities can arise when a market is dynamic, and we all know that the world now is struck by a pandemic. So I would like to start giving you an update about how Russia is reacting to this worldwide pandemic. Please, in the next slide, you will see some data. Please, next. Thanks. As you can see, Russia is one of the countries with relatively better performance worldwide in the world. Despite it has quite many, unfortunately, million cases of COVID registered, Russia has had up in the last year a decrease of their production of their wealth about 4%, and it is the fifth countries in the world in terms of best performances. The very best is China, who has been able to grow despite everything. And then, however, Russia is having a very, very good performance, much better than many other Western world countries or emerging countries. Now, it's interesting to know why this happened and how do we think it could continue or not. So the reason for this relatively better performance than elsewhere is coming from very solid reasons. First of all, before the blast of emergency, Russia already was in fairly good condition because they already had a low inflation rate with low unemployment, a quite stable banking sector, and large financial resources. So the fundamentals to face problems were quite strong. So this explanation also gives us some sort of solid reasons to understand why Russian authorities are very confident that in year 2021, Russia will recover all the losses that they suffered last year. And so they will become always strongly growing country. Their objective actually is to become the first world economy in terms of purchase power parity by overtaking our German friends. And this is fairly good information for those who are thinking of doing business with Russia. There also are some other reasons that we should consider. More or less, Russia does not rely so much like other countries in the small business sector. That is one of the sectors that might suffer the most from crisis. And also that they do not rely so much on worldwide financial resources. So whatever happens outside impacts less than on Russia, impacts Russia, sorry, less than other countries. Now, two very late information are quite interesting from this point of view. From one information, which was in the newspapers, they report that the percentage of families in Russia whose wages have been lower in 2021 in 2020 versus previous year is increasing. So they feel a little bit more poor. But the kind of confidence of enterprises in the recoveries is coming higher and higher. So this really shows a sort of conditions for having got to the bottom and then have a strong recovery. So all the government declaration as of now, they seem on a good way to become reality. Then within this frame of possibly optimistic perspectives, there already are some sectors who have not suffered, but who has grown in year 2020. So please, in the next slide, you can see that some sectors have performed better than in 2019. Of course, these are the sectors more related to staying home for consumers, which shows that from one side, all what's the do-it-yourself sectors, the furniture, home improvement have registered higher sales. Also, for a sort of well-being, home well-being, liquor stores have sold more. But also cars and automotive, because people were having money that they were not spending going around, and they wanted to spend and devote this expenditure to something which could be a sort of investment for the future, so that even if there should be problems with rubles and so on, they would have purchased at the right moment. There is another sector that perform fairly well. It's healthcare, medicines, and healthcare products. Just a few words about it, please. On the next slide, people were afraid that medicines would have started lacking all the medicines from imports, so they ran buying at pharmacies. So there has been a growth in the number of pharmacies, more or less 1,300 something in 2020 opened new pharmacies. And also there has been a rise in the turnover of this industry. It's interesting to notice that it is in the turnover, not in the quantities, because people started buying more expensive medicines. And also the price for the cheaper medicines have increased because raw materials were coming from outside. And this also is a quite nice information for foreign companies who want to plan to invest in there. There is another sector, industrial sector, that has gone pretty well with solid reasons, which is the agricultural sector. You can see on the next slide, please. Why? But not simply because the climate has been quite overall positive, even if some areas have suffered some storms. But however, overall the climate was good. But the Russian government is undergoing a process of enhancing the quality of all the apparels of what's necessary to have a more modern agricultural sector. So this is something which continues. This is something which is attractive machineries and equipments from outside, because other countries might have more modern technology. This also, however, shows a point that foreign investors should take into consideration. That is that Russia wants to become less and less dependent on imports, especially of important things. So also all the money that can go to the purchase of new technologies and equipments will be on the benefit of companies who have a certain level of integration within the Russian productive system. And so this is something which must be taken into consideration. Less and less the pure export to Russia can be profitable. More and more, some solution of localization can increase the chances of sales. There is another yet important tendency in the Russian economy, which is, please, on the next slide. You can see that the construction industry is undergoing a national program that wants to enhance and to bring a lot of investments because the Russian economy and infrastructure shall be stronger and stronger. It involves 12 areas of the society. And on the next slide, you can say, please, that the industries, the sectors where infrastructure will be financed the most are the sector of all the transportation, from motorways, airports, ports, and so on, because Russia wants to be more and more a very efficient point of transit of goods from the very east, where our Chinese friends are, to the very west, where our European friends are. And Russia is in between, trying to transport goods and more to be efficient in producing as well. For example, in the agriculture, I did not mention it, but the long-term goal of the Russian government is that Russia becomes not simply self-sufficient, but also a relevant worldwide exporter of agricultural goods. So here there will be a lot of investments pouring from the government. They forecast 400 billion USD to be invested. 160 billion of which will be specifically dedicated to strengthening infrastructure and roads. This program is giving, however, some very good, let's say, proofs of being successful, because as we can see on the next slide, you will see that all the railway system already is transporting more and more goods through all the territory. So also here, money is coming, programs are existing, investments are made, and results are coming, which is pretty, let's say, interesting to be noticed. And the third, I would say, big area that needs to be underlined is the part of construction industry. So please, on the next slide, we can see that the devaluation of currency, however, is an interesting factor for an investors to go there. And it's also a positive reason of attraction for all what are the machinery, the technical solutions and services that, like in agriculture, can make the system more efficient with higher quality products and services and technologies. Also here, the fact that a company has some form of localization in the country will reward the investments very much. Now, let's say we have talked about how the system, the Russian system, is reacting to pandemic. We are talking about which are the most relevant sectors in Russia. What has it to do with green technologies? That's topic today. So please, let's go back. If you go to the next slide, let's repeat a slide that I have shown before. So this is, how the 400 billions go. First of all, a relevant part, more or less 60, 70 billions USD, are going, however, to environments and so on. But what's most important is that the Russian government has understood what is the importance that, for example, the European countries devoted to having new, let's say, green resources. So Russia is has aim of switching from fossil fuels to green energy. And this already is a very important information. Of course, green energy and hydrogen has several colors, from gray colors, purple, and so on, hydrogen. The Russian state is going mostly on the blue hydrogen, and this is provoking the need of apparels, of pipelines, and so on, that can transport all the goods from the several parts from the customers in the Western world to the recycling areas into Russia. So a lot of investments are here, but also in terms of for other hints about the importance of green technologies. Moscow is issuing for the first time green bonds that will have to finance projects for the environment protections. And also in 2019, the Russian railways have been the first Russian company that went on the foreign markets with green bonds. So there is a moving market and there is a strong interest about these technologies. And talking about now these details, who better than my colleagues, Mr. Christoph Spank, can go into any detail to explain you what is a green technology perspective and market and industry in Russia. So, Christoph, please, up to you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much, Luca, also for this introduction to Russia, and of course, a very warm welcome also from my side. My name is Christoph Sprank. I'm responsible for market research in Schneider Group, and I now have the pleasure to give you two small excerpts into green technology as it is implemented currently in Russia, and where Western companies actually can benefit from this. Let's start with the first topic. The first topic is waste management, which is a fairly new topic in Russia. It's been on the agenda since basically 2018, declared as part of the national projects that Luca had previously mentioned. There's a national project called Ecology, and part of this is also the whole waste management system and implementation in Russia. For those of you that are familiar with the Russian market, you might know that, let's say, recycling and sorting of garbage and all of these sort of things are things that you don't really see in the country until very recently. And on the right-hand side of the slide that you see here, we've basically displayed, let's say, the 5 areas of waste management that are now step by step are being implemented in Russia, which is on the one hand, of course, the separate collection and removal of waste, in particular, of course, your household waste, but also industrial waste. The sorting as a second step into various components of the waste, the processing of this of these materials and the sorting towards recyclable or reuse of components. And then to some extent, the composting in landfills throughout the country. And at the same time, the other part of the component, basically the energy recovery that is then fueled back into the system and makes this a green system, basically. So these 5 things you need to keep in mind when we talk about the steps that have been implemented so far. So in 2020, Moscow actually is one of the first cities in Russia, and obviously the largest city with 12 million people living in this city and 6 million living around the city, has only introduced the dedicated separate collection of garbage, in particular household garbage, in 2020. This was accompanied by the purchase of 85,000 additional containers for recycling or separation of garbage, by the purchase of 500 new garbage trucks, as well as 4 facilities that were put in place just for the sorting of this garbage. Now, this goes in line with the president's decree that had been signed last year, in the summer last year, that basically envisions that until the year 2024, which obviously is not too far away, considering that all of these projects also need to be implemented, the country will have to close about 190 landfills throughout all of this large country. And at the same time, increase the rate of non-recycled polymers to 50%, or basically reduce this rate or increase the rate of recycled polymers to 50% or more, which obviously is also a big challenge. And in order to reuse or regain some of the energy that has been in these packages and so on, the building of 25 waste incineration facilities has been commissioned, and currently it's just a matter of deciding where exactly these facilities are supposed to be located. The total investment volume for these 25 facilities is 15 billion euros. And of course, these facilities are using Western technology in order to be maximum efficient, which is basically also where Western companies can benefit from this. And this is part of the question about where to locate these things, basically shows us part of the challenge that Russia is facing in many areas of the economy, namely because the country is so large and because the country tries to go green in all aspects of the topic. Locating these incineration plants is a challenge because on the one hand, you would like to have them close to cities, and on the other hand, you would like to have them far away from the cities because you need the population on your side for these sort of things. And at the same time, you don't want to ship garbage or waste from one end to the country to the other end, because this obviously also creates carbon emissions that are the main goal to be reduced. So this is a challenge that carefully needs to be balanced and that the country is currently going through. Another aspect of how to reduce waste in this old slogan of reduce, reuse, recycle is a policy that has been in place already for some time and had been refined at the end of last year to be taken effect from the beginning of 2021. January 1st, 2022, which is called EPR system, or extended producer responsibility, and basically deals with the responsibility of producers, manufacturers, as well as importers for the packaging of goods. So not necessarily the primary or the packaging, but also the secondary packaging. And basically it obliges these manufacturers to take responsibility in the receiving, collection and recycling of the material, as well as getting the material back into the recycling system, paying an environmental fee, and at the same time having to take care of the composition and the packaging and the recycling of the materials. And if there's a non-compliance detected, then obviously the fees are quite hefty, or the fines are quite hefty. And this has a particular impact, of course, on all of the companies who are merely exporting to Russia, because they will also be subject to this environmental fee and the responsibility for their packaging. So most likely what we will see is that companies who are merely exporting to Russia will basically be unable to comply with the collection and recycling of the packaging here in Russia, and hence will have to pay a fee which is basically twice the average environmental fee, and this will have an impact, of course, on the total price of such products. Hence, this is something absolutely necessary to consider for companies exporting to Russia, how to deal with this starting from next year. Another issue, or basically another point in which Russia is trying to innovate with regards to becoming greener is something that actually hasn't really been initiated here in the country, but actually, let's say in the European Parliament, which is the carbon border adjustment mechanism as part of the Green Deal of the latest EU Commission, headed by Ursula von der Leyen. Which basically has, as part of this Green Deal policy, let's call it vehicle of taxing imports into the European Union based on the carbon emission that was produced ejected during the production of the goods. Now, basically, who will be affected? Of course, any country or any company exporting to the EU, and at the same time, particularly those industries and companies that are very energy intense. So this is, we'll get to this in a second. So particularly chemical industry, metallurgy, oil and gas industry, forestry, and so on and so forth. And what we see as the next step is obviously a great demand by these businesses to implement technologies to reduce these carbon emissions. The timeline is this, that the Green Deal had been announced late in 2019. At the current stage, the technicalities are worked out, which industries in particular are going to be affected, or let's say targeted first from the EU side, and at the same time how the calculation methods are being put down on paper so that businesses can eventually start calculating their methods or their actual carbon emissions. But as I mentioned before, what we already foresee is that there will be great demand on the Russian side, or on the side of exporting businesses, to implement these technologies in order to remain competitive. Now, the impact of this policy on Russian economy is currently evaluated. Let's put it like this, because on the EU side, not all of the technicalities have been completely decided yet. As I mentioned before, you see on the left-hand side of the slide some of the industries that will be most likely affected. And also, of course, these are the industries that that Russia is most known for, with exports to the EU in particular. You can see the total volume of trade between Russia and the EU in this direction actually is about 233 billion US dollars. And it is said that about 50 billion US dollars per year will actually be subject to this EU border carbon border tax. Hence, obviously, quite a large share or considerable share. You see here on this slide, actually, some of the companies, some of you might know some of these, others might be not as familiar, but these are the largest ones in these particular industries. And obviously then those companies most likely to be affected. And as I know from details in the, from contacts in the industries, these are also the companies that are already on the forefront of striving to implement technologies in order to reduce this carbon emission, to limit their exposure to the EU border tax that so far is believed to take effect, let's say, in 2023. So there's still a bit of time, and this is, of course, what companies here also need, and what the government is also trying to push for. Because what is Russia's reaction, or what was Russia's reaction to the announcement of the implementation? On the one hand, of course, as I mentioned before, part of this national project ecology, the programs such as clean air have already been implemented here in Russia that actually do have limited, let's say, connection to the EU carbon border tax, but of course now go hand in hand. So in 2019 and 2020, a project was implemented in which 20 selected cities in Russia that are have been subject to the worst kind of air pollution detected in the country have actually been obliged to implement, or in particular the industries in these cities have been obliged to implement filter technology in order to improve the air quality for citizens living in these cities. This affects 20 million people out of the 147 million that live in this country. This is, of course, only a first step, because this is, let's say, a city-wide step. At the same time, as Luca had mentioned, more and more companies have been forced to implement environmental standards, social standards, governance standards into their businesses, simply because investors are no longer or are obliged or are no longer interested in investing in companies if these companies cannot show that they have a clean track record of implementing green technologies and green standards into their business processes. And this is obviously then, let's say, a force that is quite important also for Russian businesses. And at the same time, the Russian government has just announced at the beginning of March 2021 to open what they call a sandbox in the Sakhalin Oblast, which is in the Far East, close to Vladivostok, and to basically start the introduction of a carbon emission trading platform in order to train businesses to implement technologies to reduce the carbon footprint and the carbon emission in their production, which now has, let's say, a sample character in the country. And if it is going to be successful, then there's a very high chance that this system will be rolled out throughout Russia and basically result in heavy investments by businesses into carbon emission reduction technology. And as I said before, these technologies are mostly of Western origin, simply because this has not been an issue in Russia so far to the extent as it has been in Western countries. And this is where we see a great opportunity for Western businesses to participate in this. How can Schneider Group help you if you become interested in the topic, and if you would like to hear more about the opportunity as well as where to start? In my department, market research department in Schneider Group, basically we help our clients with dedicated industry reports, with dedicated market analysis, but as well as customer or client search, as well as partner search, if that's the question. We also help with import and certification topics, because you have to be aware that doing business in Russia means doing business outside the European Union. Here, so the certification that the European Union, actually the CE certificate is not applicable. A new certification is required. We have more information on this, how to obtain it, what the process looks like, and so on and so forth. As well as we have a very large legal department that also assists with any legal matters in obtaining documents, obtaining permissions, but as well as working with partners, contracts, and so on and so forth. If the carbon topic is something that you would like to hear more about, there's a dedicated webinar that we are going to have on the 31st of March, and the invitations we will send around shortly. If you're interested in it, we'll be happy to send you an individual invitation, of course, if you send us a quick message. And this is all from my side, a quick overview of green technologies implemented here in Russia. And with this, I hand over to Riccardo to hear more about the issue in China.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Christoph. So let's now move to what's happening to China. One aspect that it's interesting to note, in my point of view, is first of all, as a consumer, as a human being, that a very big country like Russia is going very, with a great attention in the green field. It is fantastic for all of us who have to breathe in the world. But the other, as a businessman, is that the situation for companies dealing with Russia will have to cope with laws and rules that are changing. So it will be very important really for exporters or investors to organize carefully so that they can cope with this situation. And we are here for this Schneider Group, and Riccardo for China and his other countries will be effective as well. Now, Riccardo, please go on.
Thank you very much for the invitation to take part in this panel discussion about green technology, limitations, etc., on how countries like China, from my perspective, are progressing on the matter. I hope you're seeing the screen properly. If not, just drop a message. Just to give it more context about who you have in front of you, just like Luca also did for himself and for Schneider, my China adventure started in 2005, and since 2014, I have been working at this firm specifically in Shanghai, where I was deputy regional manager of our East China offices. I would like to get right into it because I do have several issues to cover, but please let me introduce my firm a little while now. For almost 30 years, we have been supporting investors in their foreign direct investments into Asia with strategy and implementation, supported by more than 300 in-house legal, accounting, tax professionals, and IT professionals in HR. 40% of our clients are Europe-based. The remaining 40%, the other 40%, another large part is the US, and the rest is the rest of the world. And so being it European-based is 40%. That is why I am today talking to you from Munich, where we have just recently set up our legal entity in January to support clients and partners more closely. Our practice is based on our founding partners' passion for Asia, which itself is explanatory because consider only 5 out of 25 offices of ours are located outside of the Asian mega region, 11 countries of which are covered by our own offices, direct partners. A traditional firm that is internationalizing would look at a model that is shaped in this way. Different services, different providers, but we have adopted since 1992 a full service approach, helping companies to access all of these services under one roof only. What is on the menu? This is a blank slate, I know, because I need to capture your attention first, but the title that I chose for my section could be as enticing as it is deceptive. Enticing because green and other energy-related policies of China today are more than ever in the spotlight, and they are definitely improving. Deceptive, on the other hand, because with some attention to the topic, anybody can see how, not just for China, but also maybe for Russia, making a dramatic or instant change to the dependency of its country or the economy on a specific or very few type of energy sources is quite the task. This is why I need to make some of an introduction of the current framework on how China consumes, produces, buys maybe energy, to understand why we got here and how we got there, and that the promises we heard in the 5-year plan of last week are well-intentioned, but will take time, lots of it. So what is on the menu today? I will try to keep my promise in delivering 3 things. 1 is the framework of China's energy consumption and investment. 2, how green is China's 5-year plan really? And the opportunities, which everybody is looking forward to hear, and that's what I left it at the very end. Going on with the first topic, China's consumption and investment in energy. So the dependence on coal alone in 2019 reflects the following number. 58% of Chinese energy's use is coming from coal from that year only. And since 2011, China has consumed more coal than the rest of the world. Not difficult to believe, because we hear this most of the time, but also it has an incredible trend compared to other mega consuming countries such as India, which didn't make it to the 80% that China instead covered in 2018 based on its emissions of coal, 26 for the United States of America and 28 for Europe. So if you look at the graph, since the early 2000s, China has kicked in with the coal consumption, and of course has overtaking the global consumption of this resource, making it an immediate emergency for the entire planet because of the figures that I just mentioned above. But it is also spending smartly. China in 2019 has roughly spent $84 billion, which is on renewable energies and on green technology, which covers 23%, represents 23% of the global spending. So China is the world's largest investor in clean energy, and that may sound a bit paradoxical, but it is true. Between 2013 and 18, the country's investments in renewables grew from 53 billion US to an impressive peak of 125 billion. It has fallen recently, but in 2019, it still is at a good 83.4, as I just mentioned, US dollars. So that's also, again, a pretty important share of the global spending in this sector. Let's talk about renewables. Another pledge that China has made is that by 2040, 1 out of 4 gigawatts produced will be from renewable energy. So for people who are not technical in this, including myself, I had to do some research. What is 1 gigawatt? It is 3.125 million photovoltaic panels, which are the small 325 watt ones, or it's also equivalent to 412 utility scale wind turbines, as you see in the background. Or if you imagine 110 million LED lamps turned on at the same time. Now, how green is China's plan? The 2021-2025 5-year plan. First of all, maybe I'm wrong, I'm most probably wrong, but sometimes it is not understood where this 5-year plan comes from. And today's meeting between Russian colleagues and experts and China side begs the question, has this ever come from Russia? It actually has. So in the early years of the 40s, 50s, there has been a lot of interaction between China and Russia, obviously also on economic planning. And the 5-year plan is actually coming from the Soviet Union's tradition. So this year, this is one more year than the 13th and final 5-year plan released by the Soviet Union in 1991. So we have, the Chinese economy has learned from the Russians to segment and to calibrate their economical projections. So what does a 5-year plan do? It sets the agenda. Sets the agenda for investment, for the economy, for politics, definitely for support for companies that have to participate in one improved sector and the other. But it is now something that is definitely more important than before, because it includes the environment, which we'll talk about today in the following slide. So at a UN speech in September 2020, maybe some of you will remember that, quote unquote, Xi Jinping gave one among his announcements, he made a surprise declaration that another pledge that by 2030, 20% of the country's energy will be derived from non-fossil resources. And this has been also, of course, very welcome. And he said that by 2060, China will achieve carbon neutrality. So we're filling our mouth a lot with a lot of definitions like non-fossil, carbon zero, carbon neutrality, and carbon other related definitions, but we'll see about that a little bit later because I think it benefits all of us. Now, the 5-year plan always has targets. It has targets that have been more incentivized. Some of them are indicative, some of them are binding. It's all up for us to read on the documentation, really. But in general, I can help you summarize. So the targets that have been included or dropped, let's say the new ones and they dropped are the following. The urban hukou, for example, has been dropped. The service sector has been dropped in favor of talking and discussing and investing into the manufacturing sector. Patents per 10,000 population has been dropped, and digitalization also. Job creation is under control, and the target is 5.5% for this year. People out of poverty is not a target of this 5-year plan anymore because the 5.1 million people that were supposed to be brought above the poverty line have been so, at least reportedly. So which are the new targets in this 5-year plan? Food production, energy production, but read this also as food security and energy security. We'll come back to that later. Valuable patents are also new targets. The share of the digital economy within the economy is also a new target. Medical professionals per 100 people, but there's also more. I'm just picking out a few. So which are the returning and moving targets of this 5-year plan of China? Growth. Growth target is back. Why is it back? Did it ever go away? Yes, it did go away last year because of the uncertainty given by the virus. So now this year it is back. So technology and innovation are also back and kind of a moving target also because it goes back to 5G, AI, biotech, but also includes strategic industries that are targeting self-sufficiency to become, that has turned into a national priority. And we'll see this in a bit later. Climate policy, again, as I said, is very high on the agenda. But why do you think it is high on the agenda? Just because it is a good advertising for China doing good deeds and committing to the Paris Agreement? Maybe, maybe not. But after Trump's time, it is even more so time for great leaders of the world, such as China, to lead the way in creating a better sustainable economy and planet. So going to the bottom of this, the other reasons why this climate policy is high on the agenda is because environment is always a cooperation tool, no matter what. If you talk about environment, you will reach out to the government's core and meet everybody's interests because of the shared risk and the shared opportunities within the environmental framework. It also helps to de-emphasize the economic growth. So not to always focus on economic growth, on which China has heavily relied on and made a lot of advertising for and announcements about in the last 5 decades. And it also puts energy security front and center. So why did I mention security before? And I said I was going to talk about it now. Because China relies more on energy than what you can think. Not only it buys more coal than what it already mines in its own country, but it also imports a lot of energy and also a lot of oil from the most notable countries. So in order to leave that dependency and create a pool of self-reliance of energy and food, China has to be more realistic and understand that in case of tensions or in case of loss of potential support in this environment, so potential more food and more energy from other countries, it has to rely on its own reserves. So China is actively building on reserves. There's ways to do it from within and ways also to do it outside. And I'm not going to talk about the investments that China is doing around the world to make sure that those countries also can give in return either energy or food. Water, energy, and an environment will be extremely important for the quality and survival of the people of countries as big as China. Uncertainties remain. China's infrastructure, believe it or not, needs upgrading to absorb the more mixed energy renewables. So this means that any company or any know-how that is out there that can help Chinese provinces or local provinces and economies to increase or upgrade their grid, please is very welcome to participate in any tender or just make research through us and see where they can apply for their technology. The government-specific action plan is yet to be published. This is for the scientists in the room that wish to know how many gigawatts or trillion gigawatts are needed in what sector, or what kind of chemicals are being more focused on for the next 5-year plan and which aren't. Another issue is decentralization of the efforts for lobbying. We were used to seeing companies going to Beijing only to see whether their know-how and whether their participation in this climate economy progression can be done. But now Beijing has deferred much of this decision-making power to local provinces and their main cities. So the lobbying process will be done directly between companies and local provinces or local economies. So whether this is going to be good or bad, it is for us to see. I promised that I would like to make some clarity on some definitions that have differences. Carbon neutrality, what is it? Carbon net zero, and climate neutrality. So while in practice, carbon neutrality, net zero, and climate neutrality are often used interchangeably, we need some clarifications. So bear with me. Carbon neutrality means having a balance between emitting carbon, CO2, and absorbing carbon from the atmosphere in carbon sinks, or capturing this, and it's actually something that has been done also in other countries. For example, they deep push the CO2 into some specific basins in the dirt, and it can stay there instead of going back into the atmosphere, contributing to the GHGs, which are the greenhouse gases. But removing carbon oxide from the atmosphere and then storing it is known as carbon sequestration, what I just mentioned. In order to achieve net zero emissions, all worldwide greenhouse gas emissions will have to be counterbalanced. Excuse me about that. Will have to be counterbalanced. And net zero emissions means that it encompasses all greenhouse gases, but also refers to balancing the emitted greenhouse gases with the removed greenhouse gases within a certain period of time. So this is a progress. It's not something that you can choose. It comes from carbon neutrality first. You reach net zero emissions, and then you actually achieve climate neutrality. But what is climate neutrality? It's the ultimate level. It is basically when a country has obtained neutrality on carbon, net zero emissions, but also is leading its economy in a way that no activity of humankind or origin is impacting the environment. Probably a long stretch, far-fetched for every economy, but that's what we're seeking to see for our children. So this 5-year plan that I am talking about today, which is important because it is determining the policies for the green economy and investments, has been dubbed also to be probably the most crucial document in global energy market history. Well, let's see about that. But we definitely know that there's key takeaways, as usual. And we've heard this, where Xi Jinping in China said that there will be a peak carbon emission by 2030. There will be an achievement of carbon neutrality by 2060, and we just saw what that means, correct? And investments restrictions will be lifted on coal, oil, gas, power generation, except nuclear, because that's a prohibited industry, and new energy businesses. So that's all big talk, but we can see more details later also if we want to talk offline. The pledges by 2030, which is not so far away, is to lower carbon dioxide emissions, increase the share of non-fossil fuels in its primary energy, and we saw that China is doing this. It's already reached 20%. and reach over 1,200 gigawatts installed electricity production capacity from energy mixes. And we know what energy mixes could look like. And if we don't, we'll talk about that in a second. So in some way, are these targets that can be met? Peak carbon can be met. So if we look at the UN summit commitments, and we look at what has been reached in 2019 and what is pledged for 2030, carbon emission, forest stock, share of non-fossil fuel and percentage, and wind and solar capacity, so mixed energy, are achievable. We've seen a lot of improvement already on the first and on the second, and definitely we'll keep monitoring the third and the fourth. These are the pillars of this mixed energy or the energy mix that China so dearly needs. So let's think about mega power complexes. The background picture, it took me some time to find it, but it's perfect for what I want to say. If you imagine a nuclear, a carbon, a coal plant, solar panels, and wind generating energy installations, all of this is extremely valuable and is the ideal scenario for any country. But what about the periodic nature? Clean energy's biggest challenge is the periodic nature, which disrupts the daily planning of operations at the power grid. So deploying this with a mandate to add storage could reduce the cost of utility scale batteries, which would be stored at the mega power complexes. But this is not a silver bullet, and China doesn't have the solution for this. No country has apparently at the moment the range to be the best in this mega power complexes, but we emphasize that there's a periodic nature in handling this diversity of the energy, specifically on those that rely on renewable energy, such as wind and the sun, not always present. So you have to diversify the location where you install your wind and mills and also the solar panels. So it's always fluctuating. So what European carbon emission reduction technologies are in high demand, given the policies, given the trends? Definitely solar and wind power. You have to keep this in mind that regardless of the limitations that have been there in the past, solar and wind power are extremely in demand. Green building, there's a necessity to preserve resources, protect the environment again, and reduce pollutions. And there's 2 rating systems in China to get green building certifications. And one is GBES, I think we all know that, and the American LEED certification, which is called the LEEDs. Most Chinese domestic construction companies are not familiar with green materials. I've seen this throughout the years. It is appalling how much they build, and they still are not using state-of-the-art or at least acceptable grade of building materials that are energy smart. But there are incentives now, again, locally and nationally, for people in the building material industry that can take advantage of. I won't go through all the details here, but based on what kind of rating you will get subsidies, whether nationally or locally. Locally, for example, it's always been interesting to look west, just like China did in their 2015 policy, Go West, and where provinces that are not coastal provinces that have less investment attraction, they are giving a lot of incentives. Another sector are the NEVs, notable new energy vehicles. What are they? Electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, and fuel cell vehicles. These are the ones that we always talk about when we think about NEVs. The share of these are currently 5%, and we're looking at 25 by 2025. Now, there is a lot of discussion about whether automakers from Europe are still capable to advance in the Chinese market, given the number of very innovative companies that are already in China and are Chinese, but definitely they can still leverage their brand and their technology reputation to enter in the market and keep a foothold in the environmental friendly technologies in the automotive industries. Please notice that there have been always some exemptions that were due, that are from the 1st of January of this year to the end of next year, and they were supposed to end this year, but because of last year's trends, of course, the COVID impact on purchasing of automobiles, they have extended this, but there will be limitations. So the subsidies to cars will not be given if the specific car is above a specific price, and that's about $42,000. So some of the producers are reducing the price to market, and some of them are just staying at the same level or even going higher to determine their brand reputation. Another issue that was touched upon by Luca before, for example, are the green bonds. So it's another environment where companies can find financing. What are green bonds or bonds in general? They can be emitted by a company, a government, and a corporation, and the provinces have the capability and the authorization to issue green bonds. So they're selling their debt to private companies or other provinces who have the technology and want to purchase that kind of debt in order to get on board on their policies that that local government has for environmental friendly initiatives. So in 2017, that's a while ago already, but it feels like yesterday, the government of Tianjin, next to Beijing, has issued 10 policy measures where they illustrated which were the most green sectors in which they were going to emit green bonds. So these are very curious, very interesting and tools to keep in mind when trying to invest in the Chinese economy with a nudge for green. What are the other technologies required? I'm done here, but to keep in mind, Christoph mentioned a few ones that I really also personally like, because in Italy, there are some great producers of tools, machinery that can really bring a great contribution to waste management, especially during the COVID time, and reducing the amount of the cubic square meters of waste produced by hospitals. But let's go in order. The carbon capture technologies, we discussed this before, how to capture and sink the CO2 emissions. This technology is dearly needed. Biomass, it has been going on for a while, but China needs more contribution. Geothermal, energy derived from ocean movements. Green mining, which is a smart way of contributing to an old way of generating energy, which is still coal mining. Hydro, extremely important. By the way, hydro counts for 15% of the global energy and is very old renewable energy source. Sustainable packaging, which I've seen also already started a few years ago in China, and they're taking measures that are apparently not as big as you would think, but they are on a scale of China. If you think about number of population, which are plastic bags will not be used anymore from next year, I believe, and other measures in that direction. But it gives you that momentum. It gives you the idea and the perception of where the country's investments are going and what they're requiring from abroad or domestically. Also, last but not the least, waste management. Water, whatever for drinkable or the sewers, as Christoph said, we don't see that happening because it's under surface, but that's very, very much needed. We know a handful of companies that have accessed China in that industry already years ago, and they have participated in local government procurement, but there's always more room because more and more cities are demanding to meet the standards that Beijing imposed upon them, and they also imposed on themselves to reach these targets. These are the thoughts that I had. It has been a pleasure to share my thoughts with you, Luca, and with you, Christoph. I think that this is nothing new, but it's very important to keep reminding the people out there that have such great patents, some great technologies, and they have already had success stories in other parts of the world to contribute to the growing of the sector in China. Of course, keeping in mind intellectual property protection, keeping in mind the potential loss of know-how if you don't protect your contracts, but also keeping in mind that they're going to contribute more to their balance sheet, but also to the environment. So any effort in that direction that we can support on, whether you need to access or understand the market and run your business in these countries in Asia where we have offices, we are most welcome to connect with me, and hope to see you soon when all of this lockdown is over.
Okay, thanks a lot, Riccardo, for all the very interesting and precious information which you have shared with us about China. It's, I think, very, very positive to see not simply all the projects, not the ideas that China is bringing forward, but a very practical, concrete, real plans that they have, and very already achieved results, bringing China on the path which is very correct. So for all the friends who have participated with us in this conversation, we hope that we as Schneider Group and Riccardo as Dezan, Shira, we have been able to show you what's happening in these huge, important parts of the world. Interesting things, of course, they can represent opportunities, they can represent threats for us company, because at the end, we are businessmen and we are here, I think, wondering how we can give a contribution to these tendencies. Of course, this contribution with the benefit of our own enterprises. This is what we are here for. And of course, in these two important markets, which is all the, let's say, Eastern Europe markets like Russia and so on, and the Far East market like China and so on, Schneider and Dezan, Shira have all the expertise and all the experiences to assist companies who were interested. So, of course, we will be glad to reply to your questions, but let's see, now there is a moment of question and answer. Let's see if there is some information which is required by our participants. Most of you have asked if the materials presented today will be available, and I see that our colleagues already have replied directly to those who did the question. Is anybody else who has immediate idea, or however, of course, we are available later. Okay, I do not see other questions. So let's say it's time so to close.
Dear Luca, sorry, there is one more question. Yes, about what specific services do you provide to go to China?
Riccardo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bopang, Aldrin Bopang. If you have 3 or 4 hours, I would be happy to talk to you. All jokes aside, the access to China, I see it this way. You need to understand the market if you are not yet into the market. You need to know where to place what service and whether it's the time for you. That means if you are under or over structured, usually the case is that you're under structured or just right for the country. And then you need to figure out what kind of entity you need to set up to achieve your goal. The rest is back office, and the back office we manage. But also, what I mentioned earlier, the business intelligence angle is very important. You can access information online, you can ask companies that have done it, but you'll always get pieces here and there, and you need to make sure that are all updated and they're viable for you and they're adaptable to your business. So what I recommend is to talk to companies such as Schneider or ourselves, if it's China that you're looking at, ourselves, for business intelligence reports. And these are not just made and published, but they're also customized around your goods or your services that you wish to sell or to cooperate with or on in China. So setting up the company, doing all of the procedures for getting your licenses based on the products, again, and then the accounting, the tax, the intellectual property registration, and also the global mobility issues such as work permit, residence permit applications, and intellectual property. I also already mentioned that, but regarding trademark filing, etc. We also have recently for me means maybe 3 or 4 years, started the deployment of ERP systems for our clients who have an ERP system at home, but need to get it on the same level with their subsidiaries. So if that includes China, we can also deploy those services on the subsidiaries. I hope I've answered your question. If you want something more specific, I can answer here and now.
However, Of course, the references and how to contact Riccardo or ourselves will be and are in the presentation that will be distributed, so that if additional details were needed, of course, Riccardo, in this case.
Yeah. I can also would like to take a couple of minutes of your time, Christoph and Luca, just to say how I really like your presentations, because Russia is a part of the world that I rarely cover for business. But given the proximity, given the similarity of some of the needs that the countries like China and Russia have today, it is easy for an investor, for an enterprise, to see wider. And we discussed this many times, Luca, right? When looking at small medium enterprises from Germany or Italy or from Central Europe or wherever, it is not impossible to include both countries in the same business plan. And because they share similar pain points, maybe they have different type of opportunities to offer, but it's right out there in the, I call it the Asian mega region, because I prefer that instead of just clusters of continents. But it is very, very approachable, just like any internationalization process. So I think it's really important to see, and to see how, for example, these European agreements are influencing both economies, and where is the opportunity for SMEs from Europe.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we do have some insights about the two very peculiar parts of the world, which are, I'm talking about the Western world companies, where they are from one side very far away, very distant, because they have grown in terms of culture, they have grown in terms of their own economy differently than we have for many historical reasons. So for, let's say, European company, it's more or less easy, even if not so much easy, to think about the States, for example. But when they start thinking about China, when they start thinking about Russia and all the surrounding countries in these areas, there are a lot of questions that are unknown to them. Many people risk to have very broad ideas that attract them or reject them without, in terms of principle. And I think it's very important to have insight, which we have, because we have the good luck to work in these countries, and which is interesting. But knowing this can have very practical insight. First of all, if these countries can be very profitable for our companies. Second, let's invent how to get profit. Then, let's say, even if very difficult, Russia and China are very similar under this point of view.
Right.
They are a huge part of the world.
Yes.
Okay.
Graciously saying that.
So from my Russian colleagues, is there any other thing or question we should reply which I missed? No, it seems no.
No, thank you.
Okay, so let's say, in name of myself, who has had the role somehow of coordinating this, and the Schneider Group and Dezan, thanks everybody for attending. We hope to see you next time we will do something like this. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you, Christoph.
See you soon.
Bye.